You, Sarah, you're brown and Muslim, so we'll include you. Sarah says, okay. She makes some suggestions, and the powers that be go, well, they're great suggestions. Thank you for bringing those to us, but we don't care. This is too hard to implement. This is too hard to do. That's tokenism. That's giving Sarah the opportunity to talk and to include her, but you're not actually letting her voice have any merit or any say. Inclusion is bringing Sarah in, listening to what Sarah has to say, and then involving Sarah in a discussion about how we can deal with these things, how we can deal with this thing that looks like it's anti-Muslim, how we can deal with this thing that is problematic. Bringing Sarah into the group to help with the decision-making at that point is inclusion. And then eventually that brings us to equity, where our differences don't matter. Everyone's voice is heard, everyone's voice is equal, everybody has a say. Or everybody has representatives that will let them have a say. Does that kind of make sense? I don't want to ramble about this, but there are some very significant differences that I want people to understand. So right now, and I say this with love, and I love the SCA to bits, we are here. We are at the point where diversity, the quality of being different or unique at the individual or group level, is still very much a thing, and it is very much a thing that we're still trying hard to accomplish. Some groups are better at it than others. Some groups work better in certain types of diversity than others. Some groups have even gotten to the point of inclusion, where these differences are harnessed in a way that is beneficial, voices are listened to. Ultimately, though, we need to get to equity. So I want to talk a little bit, and I want discussion about how we get from this point of diversity and inclusion to straight up full-on equity. So we're all heralds here, and a bunch of us are voice heralds, a bunch of us are probably name heralds and armory heralds too. Some of us do a little bit of both, of everything. One of the biggest things I say to all of my heralds is cultivate a practice of mindfulness. And I can hear my daughter's eyes rolling from the other room right now, because this is what I say to her every single day. Mindfulness is all about thinking before we speak. We all have our unconscious biases. We all have our ingrained biases. We all have our blinders. But cultivating mindfulness, cultivating an aura of thinking before we speak, thinking before we do something, goes a long, long way to promoting an air of inclusiveness and equity. This is stuff like gender-neutral phrasing where you can, members of the populace versus lords and ladies, little things like that. That goes a long way to promoting that sort of equity and inclusion. Be mindful of your court shtick. Just really be mindful of your court shtick, even if it goes to the point of having to advise your crowns that, Your Majesties, this might not be the best idea. I've had to do that. I have been sat with crowns in court prep, and they have had this great idea for court shtick, and I've been like, well, this might be problematic to any minorities here. And it's been a case of having to sit down with a crown and go, Your Majesties, I think this is a wonderful idea. However, if we do it this way instead, it will be more inclusive and less exclusionary. And this is my other big thing I ask people, don't just say no. Don't just ever say, no, you can't do that, because it's offensive. Cultivate, as well as mindfulness, an idea of no but. No, you can't do that, that's offensive. But if we did it this way, it removes that offense. Or, no, this probably isn't the best idea, but how about if we ask X, Y, and Z over here, who are members of the minority group, how they'd like this to be treated, and take that into advisement. It's not necessarily flat out saying no. There's a lot of no but that goes into it as well. I actually had this exact scenario come up with a up-and-coming court herald. They were very, very insistent on wanting to do some shtick on bringing their baron and baroness into court. Their shtick, and this was at a time when tensions about Nazism was starting to come to the fore. This was just after Trimgate. This was just after certain elevations. So times were a little bit fraught. And the barony had the idea of desperately wanting to have a hydra as their emblem, a three-headed Greek snake. And of course, I can see people here starting to grimace and cringe. Because for a lot of us, when we say Hydra, we associate it with Captain America, Marvel Comics, and Nazism. This herald was not really a comic book nerd, was not really a pop culture nerd. And their impression of Hydra was Greek mythology. That was the first thing that came to mind for them, was Greek mythology. And they came to me because they were a fairly new herald, and they said, this is the boast I want to do for my baron and baroness. Okay. You're asking the populace to stand for the Hydra, and then you're commenting that the enemies of the Hydra will be crushed. Does anybody else see the problems here? I'm seeing some nods over here. Yes, this was problematic, and my response was, well, no, you can't do that. And I didn't do, and this is me not just pointing out this thing here. This is me also pointing out my errors. I was like, no, you can't do that. And the herald was like, but why? Because Google this. Look, this is what you see. Look at my phone. It is all full of references to Nazism and Hydra as representative of Nazis. But I don't think it's that. I know you don't think it's that. That's why you thought this was okay. But really, you can't do this. And I wasn't able to offer a suitable alternative. I wasn't able to say, no, but. And that led to a good half an hour or 45 minutes of going around and around in circles in this, bringing in other people to help me try and explain what the problem was. And in the end, the herald being very upset that I had shot down and poo-pooed their great idea for boast, citing that it was offensive, and I was frustrated. So I say this as both a cautionary tale and a this has really happened. No, but. And sometimes it's hard to get the but. But we have to get into the practice of no but. We've got to be able to say, this is not the best idea because X, Y, and Z. Let's look at this instead. So that's my cautionary tale. There's some comments in the chat. Yes, that's a bit awkward. Yes, Ezekiel. And would I consider that good courtly behavior otherwise? What exactly, which bit are you exactly talking about as good courtly behavior?
Okay, that was my question coming up. So thinking of it, people, vassals of the crown, coming to court and making an announcement that our enemies will be crushed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if it was Drachenwaldian court, I would ask, is it really a thing you want to pronounce coming to your liege lord's court?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Is it really good courtly behavior anyway? No. No, it's not. And that's actually a very, very good point, is that is another way I could have handled it, is this is not actually courtly behavior. If, as you say, if you were coming to your liege lord's court, would your liege lord be okay with his vassal announcing that enemies of the vassal would be destroyed? And that's actually a really good way to put it. So thank you so much for that. But yeah, that is the other way to look at it, is this good courtly behavior? And if it's not, we probably shouldn't do it. When it comes to scrolls and stuff like that, ask about pronouns. If you know somebody is going to be called into court before court, find some sneaky way to find out their pronouns. I've done this with name pronunciations too. I saw a friend, I saw the former Torch Herald actually showed me a really sneaky way to do this. Was he went up to the lady who was going to be called into court this evening, and her husband. He went up to them to say hi. It was a very friendly, hey, how you guys doing? Gave them a hug. And while he was giving the husband a hug, he simply asked, how do we pronounce your lady's name? And boom, suddenly we have, how do we pronounce the name? So ask people what their pronouns are and how they prefer to be addressed. In Meridia's, with our new OP, we've actually got a section in there for preferred titles. So if you don't want to be addressed as Lord or Lady, you can go ahead and put in your preferred title right there in the OP, which then gives at least some sort of vague idea of the pronouns, and at least means that we're not going to be getting it horribly, horribly wrong. So ask. That is the biggest thing I can say, is be mindful and ask. So if we talk about titles for a bit then, I'm assuming that everybody is now very much aware of the 2 gender-neutral English titles. If you're not, please say something and we can talk about it. If you're good with them, then we're good. Let's use them. Let's encourage people to use them. And I've had to say this in other classes, and I'm going to say it here again. These are not a, you must use these. These very much are, this very much is a option. If my friend Joe is non-binary and doesn't want to identify as male or female, and they choose to use noble or armature, that is entirely their call. That is entirely what they want, what they can do. And it doesn't matter what you want to do. If you want to be lady, you can still be lady. If you want to be lord, you can still be lord. This is an extra option, not a replacement. It's an and, not a not. I have an example from Beatrice in the chat. Another example which also helps with things like alternate titles. The herald for the next barony over used to approach everyone she thought might be local and introduce herself with, your face looks familiar, but I can't place the name. I'm insert name here and you are. And then she'd take notes. That's a great one as well. That's one that I've used too in the past. It gets really hard when you've been playing for about 6 or 7 years, and everybody in the kingdom actually recognizes your face because you've done that many courts, but you don't. People sometimes get a little bit offended, but you're like, I'm sorry, I have a terrible memory for names. I'd forget my own name if it wasn't, firmly etched in my brain. Play it down if you have to. But this is this is very much a thing of, this is how we gender inclusive societies, is by just asking and respecting. I now call my crowns in as sovereign and consort versus king and queen. If they want to use the titles king or queen or Ra, whatever, I will use those for them in court. But 9 times out of 10, I will boast them in as sovereign and consort of the kingdom, simply because that sets a tone, at least in my opinion, that they are sovereign and consort, not necessarily king and queen. There's a subtle difference there that sort of speaks to gender roles and speaks to other sorts of gender issues. So I always use sovereign and consort at least for opening courts and closing courts. Anybody have any comments or questions?
Yes, I actually have one.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually two. In Ansteorran, we have a peculiar idea of how we use the word noble.
Mm-hmm.
So we would probably just be using armiger at the end,
Okay.
which I personally have no problem with. We also have no problem with queen, since we have had a queen by right of arms, which Meridian's has not.
No, we have
So
not.
for us, it is not sexist. They are
Yes.
equal footing.
Right. And they are technically equal footing in Meridian's too. Absolutely equal footing. There is sort of, we like you say, we have not had a queen by right of arms, so we don't have the precedence for that, which is why I use sovereign and consort.
Excuse me.
Yes.
We've just discussed the matter of sovereign and consort and king and queen regarding the Drahenwald law, and we came to the conclusion that actually sovereign and consort are roles given to parties of crown, whereas king and queen are titles.
Interesting.
And we are actually trying to work against the idea that sovereign and consort would be used as titles in these parts. So,
I absolutely agree that sovereign and consorts are very much roles, king and queens are titles. I believe that I'm actually in complete agreement with you. I would say that my crowns are the king and queen, but they're the sovereign and consort of Meridians. Does that kind of make sense? Is that subtle differentiation?
yeah, that makes actually rather nice sense.
Yeah, exactly. I will introduce my current crowns as Timothy and Ismay, the sovereign and consort of Meridians. I would never introduce them as sovereign Timothy and consort Ismay. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense.
I think I follow your idea.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree. Sovereign and consort are very much roles. King and queen are very much titles. They are not entirely interchangeable. And yes, as Petari says, how about X and Y, the crown of Z? Absolutely. I have used that too. The crown of said kingdom, or I also use X and Y, the baronage of Z, if it's a barony. So absolutely, that is also a perfectly acceptable way to do this. Anybody have any questions so far?
Not a question, though. I made the comment in chat. We do have a few in Kingdom who use the title Laird, L-A-I-R-D. I'm not sure what nationality that may be? Or
That
language?
sounds Scots.
Could be,
Yeah.
knowing those who use it.
Yep.
But that's an option that has is starting to be used more often in our kingdom as well.
Yeah, that very much sounds Scots. Yes. Okay, so the next bugbear for a lot of us court heralds is boasts. I've already given you an example of when a boast became problematic. I'm not going to go over it again. My general guidelines for boasts are no allusions or references that could be taken out of context and put the kingdom in a poor light. I mean, I had the mind's eye with the Hydra thing of, a clip going out onto social media of this petite white person bringing two more very white people in, starting with Rise for the Hydra. And I had visions of this going viral on social media and just what that could look like. And just, yeah, before you make up your boast, could this paint the society or the kingdom in a poor light? Could this be taken out of context and be interpreted as hate speech? Or does it espouse qualities or values that are contrary to the core values of the SCA? And that's something we should all be mindful of as well, is anything we say or do as court heralds should be entirely in line with the core values of the SCA. Those are really, really important. Another question to ask yourself is this actually overly modern? Or, well, this is a perfectly period boast. Are there negative modern interpretations that could be found of this? Are these references now sort of seen in ways that are unpleasant? And while we as Scadians tend to look at the period meanings more closely than modern meanings, sometimes we can miss the woods for the trees. And that very much becomes I don't want to say this is political correctness. This is, again, mindfulness. And this is basically how I train my heralds to take care of boasts, is you write your boast, it's all good. You don't have to write it. You can make it up on the fly if you like. But can this be taken out of context? There was a boast that a court herald did relatively recently in a small canton. There was a kingdom court happening in a small canton, and the court herald decided that they were going to have some fun. And this is a small canton on the Tennessee-Alabama border. And their boast was done in a very broad Appalachian accent and made a lot of stereotypical references to people that you might find in that people that you might stereotypically find in that part of the country. I'm just going to leave that there, and if anybody has any comments, go for it.
So I have another example that's not necessarily of things that could be offensive in general, but just to be considerate. When I was baronial herald, my barony is the 13th in precedence in our kingdom. And so that was always included in part of our boast. And for a long time, because of the barony's motto of only the best and so on, we had a, 13th and best. And then our baron at the time found out that that was causing some hard feelings among some of his cousins. And so it was a, what can we change? And they came to me and said, what can we change this to instead? And they wound up playing on the number 13 and just saying luckiest, which got a lot of laughs and got rid of the, oh, we're saying we're better than all of you.
Right. Yes. Yes, that's what I've seen come up too, is let's not say that we're better than our baronial cousins. That way lies madness. So much madness. Let's not do that. That's a terrible idea. Now, I'm not going to say let's not do that across the board. Sometimes, with the consent of everybody involved, you can totally do court shtick in your boasts. You totally can, but it's with the consent of everybody involved. It's with the consent of the barons and baronesses involved. Don't do it otherwise, please. It gets bad. And apparently now my cat has decided to join us because, yes. So there. We now have a cat in here. So very much so, be careful of your boasts. Be very, very careful of your boasts. Be very careful how they might come across. And apparently be careful of your cats too. I'll just stand here like this, it's fine.
You see this achievement is now unlocked.
Yes, presenting well cat. She has never ever done this to me in the middle of a court at least, which I am grateful for. All right, coronations and investitures. These are some of the most fraught things I have seen. Coronations and investitures in period were generally very, very religious events. They were basic enshrining the validity of the ruler. So you are in fact perfectly able to do a period coronation or a period investiture without getting into gods. You can even do a period decoronation without getting into gods. In Meridies, we have a tradition of our rulers passing away or otherwise vacating the throne. When Timothy and Ismay vacated the throne last time, they went off to help their allies in the Middle East. They did not go to Jerusalem. They did not go to the Holy City. They did not go on crusade. They went to help their allies embroiled in conflict in the Middle East. It's a subtle differentiation, but it's a big one. Your allies in the Middle East, it doesn't actually state their religion. It doesn't actually state what they're doing or what their religious beliefs are. It's helping our allies, helping our friends. So subtle word differences can make a big, big difference. And as well as being able to incorporate elements rather than as religion, as gods, as myths. So 2019, the Barony of Thor's Mountain had its first baronial investiture in 40 years. Our barony, exactly as you might think from the name, Thor's Mountain, has a very strong Norse theme in our barony. It's there. In that investiture, we had people who played Odin, Freya, Frigg, and the rest of the Aesir. Not once was there mention of anybody worshiping them or anybody serving them. The entire investiture was taken as the crowns of Meridies had made an ancient treaty with the lords and ladies of another kingdom who were represented by Odin, Freya, Frigg, and the Aesir. And they had recalled their ruler because their ruler was now getting old and needed to retire and rest. And so Odin, Freya, Frigg, the Aesir came down to Meridies from their lands to negotiate and treat with the kingdom of Meridies, with the crown of Meridies, in order to release one ruler and place another ruler. It was all based around mythology. There was nothing religious in it, and it was all about honoring treaties made in good faith versus paying homage. It was incredibly period. It was very, very much taken from a lot of the work in the Havamal and things like that. But there was no sort of religious elements to it whatsoever. So basically, you can do this. It requires thought and it requires investment. And I believe that there are groups on social media who are there to help you with this. Any questions yet?
No questions, but I do like your point about the using subtle language changes, the talking about helping allies versus going to a specific side,
Yes.
or even just going to help allies versus going to war, going on crusade. Like that's a really cool differentiation.
Yeah, and I wasn't Timothy and Ismay's herald when they did this, but I sat there and I was in the audience and I was slack-jawed with just how inclusive and subtle this was. And it was subtle changes, but it worked amazingly. Check the chat, see if there's anything in the chat. Yes, yay kitty. So moving on from coronations and investitures, this now gets to the point where lots of people have opinions. Lots and lots of people have opinions. Everybody has opinions. Sometimes we even have 2 or 3 because we're heralds. My line when it comes to appropriation is very, very simple. Are you taking the sacred from somebody's culture and making it profane? Are you taking somebody's sacred headdresses or sacred writings and using them as a costume to put on or put off? Are you, what is your intent behind it? I mean, there's very much differences between respectful representation and appropriation. I have seen early Muslim personas which have been incredibly well researched. And at that point, I end up going to a person going, this is really cool. Let's talk about your research, because this is cool and I've never seen this before. And I want to know what you know and we can exchange knowledge because I'm a history geek and you know, this is part of my heritage and I want to know. Versus, are you playing to stereotypes? And there's a fine line between the two. And you've got to be careful that you're doing it. Are you treating the items with the respect due to them, or is it just a costume? And that's my line. And I'd love to know what other people think and where the line draws for other people. This is where I want to have conversations.
I feel like this is a hard one. Like I'll jump in first. Because it's one of those things that I feel like as a society we're eager to jump in and try new things and have garb in multiple cultures. And for me, I'm starting to get interested in Middle Eastern pigments, and that has led me towards interest in the culture that like shared all this. It's rabbit hole stuff, right?
Right.
That lends me towards interest in, at this time, Indian and Persian persona play, but I'm not much on persona play, but at least the garb aspect. But it's the when is it okay? And I know that that's going to be a line for everyone, but so I wear a sari and I can tell you a little bit about the history of and what cultures would have worn. And one particular sari, I can tell you where the designs would originate from. But when it's finding that, where is it okay? So when you approach somebody and say, what's your research? And they're at that entry level, or they're blank, they're not there yet.
Yeah.
How do you encourage that, I guess?
Right. And that's a really, really good point. I start up conversations is what I do. I just start up conversations, and it's like, hey, this is really cool. And I get away with it a lot because I'm a brown girl. And I'm a brown girl with an English accent, so I immediately peg to a lot of people as probably Indian heritage. So I get people coming up to me to start these conversations of, hey, what do you think of this? Can you point me in the right way? And that's very much something that I know not everybody gets and not everybody can do. I basically boil it down to education, if that makes sense.
Like at least a willingness to be educated or to learn versus those who are literally just wearing a costume. That's that's kind of where I'm at. And it's the, I guess, acceptance or acknowledging that, no, that's okay, that's an okay line to have.
Yeah. It very much is. And the other line I take is, after a lot of conversations with several friends of mine, is if you're wearing something that somebody, that say you have a Jewish persona and you are wearing something that is of religious significance to modern day Judaism, if somebody comes up to you and says, oh, hey, are you Jewish? And you're like, no. Oh, okay, this very much looked like you were. You know that's used nowadays for us in this respect, and it's kind of weird to see someone not from our culture and religion wearing it. Perhaps at that point, it's time to have a conversation with them. It's all about our reactions as well when we're called on the carpet. I have had instances where somebody has been like, hey, you're using this symbol. This symbol was basically the equivalent of the yellow Star of David in Nazi times. It was used to differentiate Jews from others so that they could be marginalized. And the response has been, whatever. That's not the...
Sorry. Emily Feathers
Sorry?
has her hand raised.
Yep, go for it.
I just wanted to stick in. This is not my anecdote, it's my husband's anecdote, but he's not here right now, so I get to use it. We got interested, 20 years ago, I guess, in the Indian culture because modernly we were adopting some kids from India. And he wanted to do an Indian persona. And because we got interested in the history and so on. And so he went to a friend of ours who is Indian, from South India, and or his parents are from South India. He's from Indiana. But anyway, and asked him, is this cultural appropriation if I do this? Where's the line? How do I do this respectfully if it can be done, etc.? And he was like, go for it, dude. But he's like, is your persona going to be Hindu? And he's like, well, I hadn't really thought that far ahead. And he said, okay, are you going to become Hindu? And he's like, no, mundanely we're Christian and so on. He's like, okay, I'm fine as long as you don't do these things that portray you as being a Hindu if you're not of that religion, because I would find that offensive. And we're like, okay, that's a really good line to draw. And so, which was kind of neat because it led to more research into the culture in general, the culture, like it's one continent, but the whole area. And so he settled on a persona out of Mughal India in Akbar's court, where he was actively collecting people of different religions. So he could have a persona that was, the persona was Christian also, because that happened. And didn't do anything religious at all, but that made him, I don't know, internally more comfortable and externally more comfortable. And we tried really hard not to do anything that would be, I don't know, presumptuous. Which leads me in a weird way around to thinking about not just religion in the SCA, but like people who will like use rosaries and whatnot on their garb, which is a Catholic symbol, which is fine. Where's that line?
Right. No. Yeah.
I'm not Catholic. It's just a piece of jewelry to me, but to somebody who's a practicing Catholic, it means something. Yeah. So we have to be very, as white folk, we got to be really careful about appropriating from other cultures, but I think we also have to consider people who match our skin tone. Is it also a thing?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, Emma. It isn't just appropriating. It isn't just white people appropriating from brown people's cultures. It's, are we doing something that could actually be offensive to somebody who looks like us, but they're a different religion, and this actually means something really, really strong in their religion. And that's a really, really good point. That's a line that I find very hard to cross and to determine. I generally tend towards it by trying not to have anything religious or that could be interpreted as religious around myself or on my person. I spent my first 4 years in the SCA refusing to wear a head covering. Just completely refusing to wear a head covering. I knew that they were a thing in Europe during the medieval period. But for me personally, a head covering was a sign of modesty and a religious commitment symbol. And so putting it on and taking it off like a costume was weird to me. I've since come to a point where I can make my peace with it, obviously, but it's a very real line. Yeah. Anybody else?
I couldn't help noticing a rather important point in what you said. It was your choice.
Yes.
It meant that for you, and you didn't seek to make that choice for someone else.
Yes. Yes. I did not try to seek to make that choice for anybody else. That was a very personal choice for me. And I've actually run into this exact same sort of, well, I wouldn't do it because X, but how do they feel about it? So we have some people who play some very, very well researched Muslim personas, sort of not in our kingdom, but sort of reasonably adjacent to our kingdom. And one of the things that they have is a tawiz on their arm. It is basically verses of the Quran that is strapped to one's arm in a small box in a respectful manner, that is to be a constant reminder of the presence of God. I would never do that, like ever. That I mean, first of all, for me, that's something that the men folk do. So I would never do that personally myself. But even if I was playing a male persona, a male Muslim persona, I would just be like, no, this is not part of my practice. But then I see people who are not Muslim mundanely doing this, and it becomes a question of, this is making me feel really uncomfortable. I feel like this is sacrilegious, to the point that I won't do it. And I was brought up Muslim. But how do I can't tell them to stop doing it because it offends me. That's not how this works. I can talk to them about it, though. And I can explain to them what I see as the cultural implications of it, even modernly, and ask what they see as the cultural implications of it in their period. And if nothing else, just be able to cause a little bit of change, cause a little bit of education. Because they might not mean it offensively. And that's what I always have to bear in mind. That's what I think all of us have to bear in mind is, really, let's not assume malice unless malice is proved. So are they doing this because they don't know any better? Are they doing this because they did their research, but their research isn't complete? And then it's up to us to start those difficult conversations, is the way that I look at it. And I've had those difficult conversations about head coverings for me. I've had those difficult conversations about use of Islamic paraphernalia as costume. But that's something where we have to start the conversations, not dictate choices.
Okay. I have a terrible need to become the proverbial bull in the china shop here.
Okay.
So if let's presume that I get inspired to play a persona inspired by period Muslims, and I find this great practice that you can strap inspirational scripture pieces on your arm to remind yourself what's important, and I pick the 3 most beautiful bits of corpora that define the dream for me to use there. Would you find that too much of a parody of real Muslim practice, or maybe an inspired version of it?
I would not find it a parody at all. I would not find it a parody. I would not find it offensive. You have taken the spirit of what was intended by this practice, and instead of taking something from another culture entirely wholesale and treating it as a costume, you've taken the inspiration from another culture that is relevant to the persona that you're playing, but instead of replicating it wholesale in a way that is culturally appropriative, you've adapted it and changed it into a way that actually has real meaning for you. And that's actually really, really important, is, does it have real meaning for you, or are you just playing? Does that kind of make sense?
Perfectly, thank you. So when you say making it profane, you mean really taking it down to dirt?
Yes, I very much do. It's very much a, how are you making it profane? The Tawiz isn't actually a Muslim specific thing. It's just, that's what it's called in Arabic. I know that there are similar practices in Judaism. So it's a practice that is spread and adapted over different cultures. So now we're spreading and adapting it into a third culture, the culture of the SCA. And I don't see that as profanity. I see that as adaptation and evolution. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And I probably have a very strange, mixed up version of what I mean by making it profane. My family is originally from India, like several generations back. And even several generations before that, they were still in India, but they were converts from Hinduism to Islam. And the way that the particular conversions happened is that, you know, missionaries, what we call peers, from Persia came into that region of India. And in order to spread the influence of Islam, the branch of Islam that they were preaching, they took Hindu songs, Hindu praise hymns, and took that imagery and applied it to the monotheistic God of Islam. And you might argue, well, that's cultural appropriation. It probably was, but it was also done in a way to make things relatable, and it was done in order to sort of, it was done respectfully in a way that acknowledged the validity of the Hindu gods and the Hindu mythology and incorporated it into the Islamic worldview. So I have a very, very weird definition of where my line of profane is. So there's that too. Yes, Luther's hymns were often rewritten drinking songs. So yes, that's a very, very good point. So that's sort of where I feel with cultural appropriation. Related to cultural appropriation is another thing that we should do, which is cultural sensitivity. This is part and parcel of appropriation. And I'm hoping that my cat has not muted me. Okay, we're good. This is cultural appropriation's sibling. And this goes, this basically goes back to, are we offending somebody with this ceremony, this boast, this court shtick? Where do the components for this come from? Where is this? What does this do? Is this offensive? Really? What are we doing here? And my prime example I give of this, and some heralds might have already heard me rant about this many, many times. Dune. I first read Dune when I was about 13 or 14. I had some understanding, I had a good understanding of Arabic at the time. I was living in a very white town in England, and I read Dune. And I was like, oh, cool. This is taking elements from my mythology and making it as part of a story, and this is great. Fast forward a decade or two, and I read it again, and being older, being wiser, no longer being a 14-year-old teenager, I start to look at it in the context of the story, how it is being used, and I'm like, well, this is actually really problematic. This phrase here that you're using to mean this thing actually sounds awfully like this phrase over here that is used to praise God. And yet over here, you're trying to bastardize it into an exclamation or a feeling of anger. I don't really like this. This is... And I started talking to some of my friends who were culturally Jewish, and we had very, very long rants via Facebook Messenger. Let's just put it that way. There was lots of back and forth going, this is really problematic. How did we not see this before? And that's my example that I will throw up and use, that, you know, Dune. I love Dune until you look at it carefully, because it is, and I know that a lot of this came from Herbert's own research, but the way it is portrayed, even today, just screams cultural insensitivity to me. which is why I can't pick it up or read it again. So that's my example of cultural sensitivity. And I sort of throw that out there as a sort of, let's be mindful, let's be careful of where we're drawing these components from and how they could possibly be problematic. Does that kind of make sense there? Sometimes feel like I'm rambling with no sort of path, but you know, I want this to be a discussion.
No, I feel that's actually a really good example, and I can see where we would make missteps.
Then,
like accidentally.
2 final things I want to throw out there. And this is where I think we can have a lot of discussion and there's room for a lot of opinions. A lot of current pop culture comes from mythology. I'm looking at you, Captain America and Hydra. I'm looking at you, Wonder Woman and the Amazons. I'm looking at a whole bunch of things that come directly from mythology that are part of current pop culture. Where do we draw that line as obtrusively modern, or that the modern implication outweighs mythological? And those of us who do armory in any way, shape, or form completely understand what we mean by obtrusively modern. No, you can't have Captain America's device as your device, really. Marvel might hurt us. And does period always mean acceptable? Just because it was done in period, is it always acceptable? And this is where I want people to talk about this, because
I have an example.
I have my views, but my views aren't the be-all and end-all.
So this is not really a cultural thing per se. But
I think, Emma, you're muted.
Oh, am I?
No, she's not,
Okay.
but I think that Sarah
Still
can't
hear
hear
you.
us.
Okay, there we go. Can you hear me now?
Nope, we still can't hear you, Emma.
Ah, why not?
Emma, I can hear you.
Okay. Let me make sure which microphone I'm using, because I've got 2 on the system.
I truly think that there's something on Sarah's end.
You're also muted, Beatrice.
How about that?
Can I just not hear anybody? Is it my audio?
I think
No,
it's
I can
your
hear you,
audio.
Sarah.
We can hear you, but I don't know why you can't
Okay.
hear us.
I think it's your speakers. She says to voice to text that doesn't pick up.
Yes. Okay. So all I was going to say is, on the bit of this period always being acceptable, of course not. We often talk about the SCA is period as it should have been. But even beyond that, as an armory example, because I love armory examples, there is a period charge that was used that was testicles. And somebody tried to register this to see, could they have testicles on their arms, and backed it up with, here's where it was used in period. And they're 100% correct. Testicles were used in period in an armory. It did happen. Can we have that today? And I was actually very much on the fence. It came up when I was on which way. And so I wrote the decision both ways with a, yes, we can because it's a period thing, and we should totally be able to do this period thing. And I wrote it as, no, we can't, because modernly, the general public is probably going to find that a little offensive. I mean, it's truck nuts on your shield, but so it's not like grossly offensive, but you're going to have a difficult conversation if that's hanging on the wall of the local Boy Scout hall that you use for your event. So we ultimately came down on the side of no, you know, with a, yes, it is very period. This is completely awesome. And you did a lot of really good research, but no. And we've also extended this to full frontal nudity. Toplessness, not a big deal, but no lower bits. That's not really a cultural thing, but that's an example, I guess, of just because it happened in period does not mean it's acceptable today. Yeah.
Emma, you said something that I was going to mention. I am super glad that this is a team effort decision, and that we do get voices from different cultures in different countries because of the idea of what is offensive being different for different folks.
It is very different, and that's something that, of course, the SCA being very North America centric, but even within that, we have the north half of the country and the south half of the country kind of have different mores, and so we have to take that into account. But then, yes, we do have to consider it's a worldwide organization for a purpose, so we do have to take into effect, how do our friends in Drakenwald feel about something? How do our friends in Lokak feel about something? And get all those opinions and merge them all together, because there's honestly been times when it's been that communication thing of, you're offended by this? This is, not a big deal here. Over there, it's a huge deal. So, yeah.
I'm reminded of certain words that have entirely different connotations in one country versus the next.
Yes.
Yes.
So I have an example of a themed event that I thought was done really well. My barony is generally around the area of Baltimore, Maryland. There's a fairly large Jewish community here. We have several Jewish members in our barony, and our baronial birthday every year is in February. So one year we had two ladies say, we want to run a Purim-based event. They were both Jewish. They got a Jewish head cook who did the whole thing. They did, and they had, like, the Performing Arts Guild told the story of Esther as just, here is a medieval style play. And there was a full, we wound up giving, sponsoring a local college student who was from out of state. Turned out he was Jewish. He was like, this is amazing. This is these are the foods that I would expect my family to be serving. And this is amazing. And this is so well done and all. But they were the ones who took point. They were the ones saying, no, this is how it should be done. And it worked amazingly.
Yeah, I mean, I've done stuff like that myself. We decided we were going to have a Moogle event in Gledenfeld because, frankly, I'd found the Aniak Bari, I'd found the recipe sections in there, and I'd looked at them, and I'd gone, that looks like what we make at home. And so I'd talked to my mother about it, and my mother had kind of gone, yeah, those are the spice blends we use. And I was like, well, this is what is the lack of differentiation here? And my mother sort of, thought about it a few minutes, and then went, oh yeah, your grandmother was taught to cook by her great uncle. Okay. Your great uncle was a Mughal chef. So I'm like, okay, cool. And so this becomes one of my things is I could recreate this, and this is literally and legitimately my heritage. And so I got to feed my friends food from my heritage, and I got to cook it, and I got to help with the planning and everything, and it was cool. And that's a way that we can that's a way that we do this well. Ezekiel posts in the chat, this makes me think of speaking in a particular accent that is not your own. Many Americans don't think much of it, but it can be very offensive to people from the country being imitated. Yes. I understand the concept of accent sponges. I have been known to be an accent sponge myself. Please don't try and fake an English accent around me. No, just no, please. It's offensive, and it looks like you're trying to make fun. Even if that's not your intent, it can look like you're trying to make fun, and let's not do that. So, yeah. Anybody else with anything or questions?
So on the events thing, I've been thinking about that a fair amount because there was a discussion in another group about essentially culturally non-Christian events. And I think that it's important that we try to highlight not just, European cultures if possible, not just the white European cultures, not just the Christian European cultures, but I think it's also equally important that we do the work so that we're doing it with care, like you said, with mindfulness, so that we're not serving pork at a Jewish themed event, for instance.
Right.
And I think sometimes white folk, I'm trying to not speak for all of white folkness, but I tend to want to give the floor to somebody of that culture, and it's not necessarily fair to them to make them do all of the work.
Right.
So I think finding a way to do the work and to be collaborative is important.
Yes. Yeah, I completely agree. Collaborative is definitely the way forward. Definitely. Okay. If nobody else has anything else, this is where my slides end. And while I can probably talk about DEI and cultural appropriation for hours and hours and hours, if there's nothing else people want to talk about, we're good.
Okay, thank you very much for your hosting on this one. I'm going to stop recording now. And
Wonderful.
if other people want to do ad hoc, the room is available for another 40-ish minutes.
This was a fantastic presentation. It gave me a lot to think about, and I really appreciate your willingness to bring it out for us.
You're very welcome. I mean, this is actually one of the classes I love doing. Because it's sort of tackling all the really hard subjects, but it's tackling it in a way that is very much, I'm not telling you what to do, but I want a conversation about this. And those sorts of things are my very, very favorite classes to do. So thank you for letting me do this.
Thank you. And again, my apologies for starting the recording late. For some
No
reason,
worries.
I cannot see the color ghouls.
It's perfectly fine. If anybody wants to see the first couple of minutes, we can just, there's a known mode recording, so we're all good.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. Alrighty, I'm going to sign off because I have a small child who would like to go see her friends for her birthday. But thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
I'm glad I could give you a different perspective on things.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Enjoy the play day.
Thanks, everyone. You too. Bye.
Bye.
Small child.
Thank you for letting us borrow her.
Can't hear him.
And Tosti, you were next up here, I seem to recall.
Yes, I am. Thank you for being interested in it.
Don't mention, it seemed like a really good one to be in.
Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to pause the video and the audio. I'm going to take a short break because I have cancer fit problems.
Oh,
I'm going to do a short cancer fit and then I'll be back.
no problem.
Right.
Take a
Thank
good
you.
break. Bye.
Thank you.